come off the end here. So again, this would be, come off the end, but face that way. That works. So again, this would be one of these subtle things. This is not a good spot, but on palpation, for instance, a 5 would be you're positioned well and he's positioned well. I can't give a great example, although there probably is one. But again, if you're palpating the ankle in the practical and you were doing this, that's just bad mechanics, right? If you do this all the time, your back's going to be sore, right? So if we were palpating the ankle, we would have him slide his leg around. So again, there's just a little consideration to where you're at, right? So and this is a good spot to palpate the olecranon, right? Olecranon is the bone, right? The bone at your elbow right there. Easy to find. You should be able to find where it disappears, right? So it kind of falls off. That's your tricep insertion. We'll kind of come back to that. But basically, you're just finding. Now, the main reason we're finding the olecranon is because eventually we're going to find the cubital tunnel, which is right off of it medially, okay? So generally, I'm palpating the olecranon, but I'm not going to find tenderness there. You know, again, by the time they get to us, we've already found out if they have a fracture or not. So we're not going to likely palpate and it be sore. However, interestingly enough, sometimes friends will ask you to look at them if they've fallen or something like that. And again, it doesn't mean you should make a diagnosis, but it does mean that you can kind of poke around and maybe see like, wow, you're tender right on the bone. So it's good to know where it's at. So that's the olecranon, all right? Medial and lateral joint line. Just like before, when we find a joint line, we're usually going to come along the bone, and there should be a little divot there. The other thing to consider about joint line is if you move it, right, the movement occurs around the joint line. So clearly if I'm here, I'm not at the joint line. I know that sounds silly. Or if I'm here, I'm not at the joint line. So a good way to kind of get in the area is to figure out where the joint actually moves. Now, in that scenario, let it relax. What you want to do, if you find your bone and come up, you will just have a small divot. And what you're going to do in this case is you're going to find the epicondyle, and when you fall off the epicondyle, that little divot is the joint line, okay? Let's look at this just so we can see what we're talking about. So if we look at the skeleton, so if we're looking for joint line, we would just be, again, lateral epicondyle, easy to find, right? Really high protruding bone. Again, when your finger falls off of that, you're there, right? So that little divot is the joint line. At that point, you should work anterior and posterior at the joint line, right? You're feeling just for tenderness. Now again, think about how big this structure is though. When I have my finger there, my finger's touching the lateral epicondyle and it's also touching the radial head, right? So we're not basing anything on what we touch. If we're tender out here, we're just identifying there's lateral joint line tenderness. You know, that could mean a lot of stuff. That could mean ligament problem, that could mean muscle problem, that could mean bone problem. We don't know. We're just trying to hone in the search, right? So you have a lateral joint line, which again, right at the lateral epicondyle, I fall off, I've got a little divot, and then I work forward and back, okay? Harder to see, but the same concept, medial epicondyle, and then again, if I just fall off of that, that's the joint line, right? Then again, I'm going to just work anterior and posterior. If I work pretty far posterior, I end up in the cubital tunnel, right? You should be able to feel between the medial epicondyle, between the olecranon and the medial epicondyle is the cubital tunnel, okay? That's where we're going to do that Tenel sign here in just a bit. So that's medial lateral joint line. Again, we've really kind of covered subsequently medial lateral epicondyle. The medial lateral epicondyle, very prominent bones at the end of the humerus, right? So those are easy to find. Very important to be able to find them, right? That's where our medial and lateral epicondylitis, commonly where that's tender, is just distal to the epicondyle. So you want to be able to put your finger on the epicondyle, and then again, when you fall off, which again is basically where the joint line is, right? But that's also, if I work across, that would be a cross-friction massage to the wrist extensors, right? So tendinitis would be tender there, right? Especially tender right at the insertion point, right? Right the last inch before the bone.
You said it'd be tender distal to it?
Yep, yep, because the muscle attaches distal, right? It doesn't cross over the top. It's on the distal part.
I've had lateral epicondylitis
Yeah.
on this arm, so I'm just trying to
Yep.
remember where
Yep.
I felt it.
That's medial lateral epicondyle. We did cubital tunnel. Last one to do is radial head, right? Radial head's kind of a deep structure. We're going to be able to grab it laterally. You want to kind of not get after this bundle of muscle here, right? You want to get a little deeper. Now, a lot of times if you have a person pronate and supinate, so turn your hand over, you should feel that radial head spinning in your fingers, all right? So again, what I would do to palpate the radial head, kind of what we call a lumbrical grip, which is kind of like a sandwich type grip. Deep, and then I'm actually going to act like I am, again, it's a little bit like we did on the clavicle, I'm acting like I'm pronating and supinating it to see if it's tender. So really what I'm wanting to do, and I'm not doing it, is turning it over and back. That's the radial head, okay? You should be able to feel it pretty well, all right, especially when they move, okay? So let's palpate bones, and then we'll come back together.